Joining me now is Professor Simon Mabon, a Middle East specialist from Lancaster University in the UK. Thank you so much for your time, Professor. We're entering dangerous territory right now with Israel and Iran in the midst of a possibly extended war that also could spread. And it's hard to predict where all this might lead to.
Yeah, I guess that's part of the issue here, that you have so many different interwoven factors, so many different issues that coalesce that have direct links to either the Iranian question, the Israeli question, that have shared affinities, be they ethnic, be they religious, and be they ideological as well. So you've got a lot of different cross-cutting political, ideological, security concerns, shared identities, shared anxieties, and that leads to a really precarious environment, a real sort of tinderbox that if the international community doesn't get a hold on this very, very quickly, could spiral.
Is America likely to get involved?
Well, we've heard a range of different things from Donald Trump and key US administration figures. So my assessment is they're keeping their options open. They don't particularly want to be involved, I would say, but that they're not ruling it out if at all necessary. And it was interesting, we saw Benjamin Netanyahu on Fox News, you just played a clip of it. He was talking about Iranian efforts to assassinate Donald Trump and a couple of different efforts to assassinate him. And when pushed, he was suggesting that, well, it wasn't direct, it was through what he termed proxies. But I would argue that that's part of a broader desire to pull the US into this conflict. And we know that Israel, we know Benjamin Netanyahu have been trying to do that for a long, long time now. But I think, and my reading of it, is that Donald Trump doesn't want to get embroiled in another regional conflict. He'd rather just sit this one out and let Israel do what it thinks that it needs to do.
But if the Iranians close the Straits of Hormuz, for example, that certainly is going to leave the international community with no other choice but to effectively respond.
Yeah, it will put a lot of pressure on, given the huge impact that this will have on oil prices, on the global economy, on global logistical routes, on air travel. We're already seeing huge impact on air travel across and through the Middle East, where some of the largest logistical hubs for air travel going east are, of course. So it would be put under a lot of pressure, but responding doesn't necessarily mean responding with force. Responding could be putting huge pressure diplomatically on Israel and Iran to de-escalate. Responding could be using diplomatic back channels, getting people back to the table. Donald Trump says that a deal can easily be made, but then he followed that up with saying sometimes they've got to just slug it out, which is a deeply worrying thing to say, to let two states that have got so much at stake in terms of their involvement in the region, so much at stake in terms of the cultural, historical significance with huge populations as well. It's a worrying thing to say. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, yes, they will be forced to respond, but they do not just have to respond with force. There are other mechanisms, other avenues that can be used.
And what do you think is going to come out of this G7 summit that, of course, begins later today in Canada?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because I think the leaders there are in a difficult position because they've got their own political issues, they're bringing their own baggage, their own sets of domestic concerns to this meeting, and yet they're also concerned about what's happening in the region. But will they want to potentially jeopardize their own political issues at home and the desire for trade relationships and deals, etc., etc.? Would they be willing to jeopardize that to go against Donald Trump and to go against the US position? I'm not entirely sure that they would, which leads to this strange sense that the G7 could potentially be another damp squib. It just something that doesn't lead to any substantive impact or change on what's happening. We may see a statement, we may see some little bits of friction, but ultimately I think we're going to see most of the members of the G7 falling in with the US position on this.
Given what you've just said, Professor Mabon, is diplomacy dead when it comes to this conflict?
No, I'd certainly say diplomacy is not dead. I think diplomacy is the only viable way out of this. We've seen in recent years that diplomacy can resolve even the most intractable or seemingly intractable conflicts. With even Iran and Saudi Arabia, longtime rivals, put aside their differences through diplomatic initiatives. We saw that the US and Iran were working closely and taking good steps towards getting a nuclear agreement. It looked like that was on the cards until we saw the Israeli strike on Tehran and the nuclear facilities across Iran. So diplomacy is not dead. There is always a chance. But the wider repercussions of not getting a diplomatic resolution to this are catastrophic, not just for the people of Iran and Israel, but potentially also for the wider international community as a whole, with further erosion of global norms, global principles, perhaps the death of the global liberal order, and working towards sort of a move towards the law of the jungle.
Professor Mabon, thank you so much for your analysis.
Thank you.